Have you ever wished you could do the impossible? Let's talk about that today on Lightly Salted.
Welcome to Lightly Salted. Now let's join your host, Debbie Harmon, for today's podcast, Walking on Water, Part 1.
Years ago, I found myself as an empty nester. My children were all grown up and moved out living as independent adults. I successfully completed that phase of my life. As awesome as it was to have achieved this goal, my question became, now what? I found myself at a new crossroad. Let me backtrack a little. From my earliest memories, I wanted to be a movie star. My daddy would take me to the movie theater once a week to catch the latest G-rated film. I loved those moments with my dad. We shared the love of movies. During the duration of the film, I was transported away into another world. When it ended, I was always sad. But my love of film didn't stop at the theater. Oh no, I wanted to be in them. My heart's desire was to one day be on that big screen. In fact, I was always creating a movie plot in my backyard on my swing set. I would con the neighborhood kids to be part of my imaginary film. My swing set was awesome. It had this double-seated glider on it, and this was my house or whatever other set I concocted. Of course, I was the leading lady in every pretend film. The two little girls next door were required to play supporting roles. They never liked this. Eventually, they refused to take part in my make-believe movies. So one day, I decided to trick them by showing them some junk mail. I claimed it was from Hollywood and that an agent was going to come see our film so that they could produce it into a real movie. Since I was only 5 and they were both younger than me, none of us could read at this time. My ruse worked for probably about 10 minutes until they tired of not being the leading lady. As I grew older, my desire to be a movie star didn't diminish. When I was in the Girl Scouts, we had to do a craft exchange with other local troops. My Girl Scout troop would spend weeks creating various craft items to use for trading. So then, on a particular Saturday, we met up with other troops at a state park to do our craft exchange. I was not the least bit interested in participating, so I used my persuasion skills to solicit a few of my fellow Girl Scouts to head out on an adventure. While scouting out a location to use as my imaginary film set, I spotted a very large granite rock. This sparked my creativity, and I began creating a storyline for a horror movie. Since this pretend movie was in my own mind, my fellow scout friends, who I had enticed to go on this adventure with me, had no idea what I was thinking. I finally began directing each of them in this made-up movie. However, it wasn't long before our troop leaders noticed we had wandered off, and they called for us to return to base camp. Reluctantly, we obeyed and headed back to the craft exchange area. Throughout high school, I was creating little skits. In fact, I wrote a short skit about a lady and the chicken. At the time, I was taking Spanish, and we had to do a performance at a local mall. I volunteered to perform a Spanish version of my skit, The Lady and the Chicken. I don't remember much about the skit, but what I do remember is that I won first prize for it, and I didn't really know how to speak Spanish. I just winged it, pun intended. It was a comedy, and the audience was cackling. I don't know if it was because they liked my skit or they were laughing at my butchered Spanish. Either way, I still won first prize. Ironically, while decluttering my house, I found my first place award certificate for The Lady and the Chicken. During my first semester in college, I took an acting course. One of our assignments was to perform a monologue in front of the class. I wrote this silly monologue about a lady who ran a weight loss program. The day of the performance, I wore a very slinky, form-fitting dress. When it was my turn to perform, I stood behind a podium and delivered my monologue. At the end of the skit, I said to the class, "Okay, it's now time for our weekly weigh-in. I'll go first." Then I stepped from behind the podium to step on the scale. The class busted out with laughter when they saw my enormous pregnant belly. Prior to the monologue, I had managed to stuff a pillow under my dress, making me look 9 months pregnant. I love ending my skits with a surprise twist. After I graduated from college, I moved up to the New York City area so that I could pursue an acting career. It was a lot of fun and a great learning experience for me. While being trained on acting in front of a camera, I observed how they filmed the scenes, switched between cameras, and all the other aspects for producing a show. Even though I wasn't taking classes in all things film production, I studied what they did behind the camera. Then, I took a hiatus and had children. For the most part, I had put my professional acting career on hold while raising them. However, I didn't stop acting. I just did it on a more local level. I continued writing skits and began performing them in churches. Some were even filmed and shown on Christian television. The skits that I produced during this time were designed to help my pastor introduce his messages. I also helped create a Halloween alternative for my church that was based on the end times. For several years, I wrote, directed, and produced skits for my church youth group. One of the many skits that I wrote was about a teenage girl who had been kicked out of her parents' house for being pregnant. One time after I performed this skit, a very sweet couple came up to me and said they had talked about it, and I was welcome to move in with them. This really blessed my heart. I kindly thanked them and told them it was just a skit. Then I let them know that I was actually 30 years old, married, and 7 months pregnant with my second child. For a couple of years, I played a 16-year-old girl in a Christmas play at my church. One of my friends said that her 16-year-old son was interested in asking me to go on a date with him. He wanted his mom to introduce us. She laughed and had to tell him that I was a 37-year-old mom with 2 kids. Needless to say, I was very flattered. While I enjoyed every minute of doing these things, I yearned for more. I still wanted to be on the big screen. My children grew up quicker than I wanted, and then one day they flew the coop. I woke up and found myself staring at an empty nest. My job as a hands-on mom was completed. This chapter of my life was over, so I turned the page to begin a new one. I knew that I wasn't ready to sit and knit my way into the sunset. I still had too much active living to do, so now it was time to redefine myself. At 46 years old, I decided to dip my toe back into the professional acting career. I began to take some acting classes to acclimate into this field. I needed to make connections with agents and get my name out there. However, I became disillusioned at the quality of the instructors. Occasionally, I would find myself interjecting acting techniques that I had learned in New York City. Not sure the teachers appreciated this. I had to remind myself that I was taking these courses so that I could meet people and hear about auditions. During this time, I was cast in a role for a TV pilot. As far as I know, this pilot was never picked up by anyone. But what was valuable to me from this experience was watching the film crew shoot the footage. I studied what they did in production. Each week before my acting class, I would overhear some of my classmates talking about the independent films they were producing. This piqued my curiosity and got the creative wheels churning in my brain. I thought to myself, if they can do it, why can't I? Now remember, when I was in New York City, I only studied acting in front of the camera. I've never been trained in behind the camera techniques, and as far as I knew, I wasn't interested in writing, directing, casting, or producing movies. I only wanted to star in them. Being a film producer wasn't on my radar. Ironically, looking back over my life, I'd been doing this either in my head or pretending as a child. In fact, I've spent my whole life creating my own material. When I re-entered the acting field, I discovered that the roles for my age range were very limited, and what was available didn't interest me. I'm a very independent person, and I also have very strong Christian beliefs. There were many roles that I wouldn't even consider due to the nature of the material. This left me with 0 options. I've spent most of my life praying, actually begging God to open the doors for me to be a movie star. My parents thought my dream was ridiculous, and they didn't support me at all in this endeavor. Instead, they required me to go to an engineering school to get a college degree. However, this didn't squash my passion for acting nor my heart's desire. In Psalm 37, verse 4 from the New King James Version, it says, "Delight yourself also in the Lord, and he shall give you the desires of your heart." Even to this day, I repeat this verse to myself a lot. Jesus tells us in John 15, verse 7, "If you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire, and it shall be done for you." Again, this is from the New King James Version of the Bible. I believed with all my heart that God had given me this desire to be a movie star. However, no doors were opening for me to accomplish this. I've spent many years feeling very depressed because of these locked doors. In retrospect, I now understand that He had a better plan for my life. But I admit that many times I felt abandoned. I had obeyed His word to the best of my ability. I invited Jesus into my heart to be my Lord and Savior when I was a preteen. I loved the Lord with all my heart. I read His word daily. I thought I was doing all the things required to abide in Him, yet He wasn't giving me the desires of my heart. I even begged Him to remove this passion inside of me. If He didn't want me to have this desire, then I didn't even want to feel it inside my heart. Guess what? He didn't remove it. Instead of removing it, He fanned the flame and the desire intensified. I couldn't understand this. While trying to figure out my new chapter in life, I thought that maybe I was supposed to put together a stage show with singing and skits. So I began working on a one-woman comedy variety show. I performed this in a few churches, but honestly, my heart wasn't really in it, and I don't think that I was very good at it. Singing isn't my strong suit. I'm not a fan of performing live, even though over the years I have done many stage performances. My heart lives in video and film. At this time, I was still taking acting classes, and like I said, I had become frustrated with the instructors. I wasn't learning anything new, and at times, I felt like I was even teaching the class. What I had learned in New York City was far more informative. Now, I felt like all I was doing was wasting my time and money, so I quit taking classes. I had gleaned all that I needed from this time. Little did I know, but a new venture was on my horizon. One day, my daughter and husband both suggested to me, "Hey, why don't you teach acting classes?" Now, what was interesting about this suggestion is that each of them made it to me separately, and neither knew that the other one had said it. What I have learned over the years is that when I get the same message from two separate sources, I need to pay attention. So I took their suggestion and ran with it. I somehow connected with two homeschool co-ops, and they both hired me to be their drama teacher. For a year, twice a week, I taught an acting class to homeschool students in two different homeschool co-ops. I wrote the acting curriculum and in fact ended up producing it into a course for youth. Little did I know that this was a stepping stone towards my film production career. Simultaneously, I was going on auditions for commercials and various other roles, but I wasn't getting anything significant. Frustrated, I asked my husband to join me in prayer regarding my desire to be in movies. Together, we got on our knees and asked the Lord what He wanted me to do. God's answer surprised me. Now, when I say that God speaks to me, I'm not saying in an audible voice, but He does speak to me through His Word, the Bible, messages I hear from preachers, words spoken by other people, and also through that still small voice in my heart. You don't have to agree with me on this, but I know that beyond a shadow of a doubt, it happens to me. Well, the answer I believe He gave me was, produce your own films. My response was, but God, I don't know how to produce a movie. The same exact thing happened to me years earlier when I felt called to write songs. I knew nothing about producing a song, yet I wrote around 70 songs, mostly lyrics, in 1 year. However, to my amazement, I even produced music for 10 of them. When I began writing lyrics for songs and had the tunes in my head, I searched for someone to create the music for me. I struggled finding someone who could or would lay down the tracks. I became very frustrated. God had called me to do something that was way beyond my capability, and yet He wasn't sending anyone to help me. I cried out to Him for help. Guess what the Lord told me to do? Create my own music. Once more, I argued with Him, just like Moses did when the Lord called him to lead the nation of Israel out of Egypt. Had God forgotten that I have no musical training or talent? Yet again, he didn't seem swayed by my argument. God will make a way where there seems to be no way. What happened next is nothing short of a miracle. Don't forget to check out part 2 of this podcast. Until next time, enjoy walking on the water as you stay lightly salted.
This podcast is the opinion of Debbie Harmon and is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing is intended as medical, professional, psychological, theological, or any other professional advice. If you would like to see more of Debbie's products, visit her website at www.entertainmentwithamessage.com or www.ewamtv.com. This podcast is copyright protected and cannot be reused without written permission from its owner, Debbie Harmon. Please invite your friends to listen to this podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and give us a like. Thank you for listening to Lightly Salted. And please join us for Walking on Water, Part 2.